Welcome to the Playing Books podcast.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, so today, I actually need to ask you, the listener, to do something pretty difficult right off the bat.
It's a big ask for sure.
It really is. I want you to take everything you think you know about global wealth and poverty and, foreign aid.
Like all of it.
All those evening news segments, the standard high school history classes, those late-night charity commercials, just completely set them aside.
You have to wipe the slate clean.
Exactly. Because today, our mission for this episode of the podcast is to thoroughly explore this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Walter Rodney.
A monumental text.
It is. We are going to dissect its overarching significance, the key subjects, its most surprising revelations, and, well, some incredibly powerful quotes.
There are so many to cover.
Yeah, and we've got a massive marathon conversation ahead of us today. But my challenge to you, the listener, is to let the ideas in this text enhance your life by actively applying this historical lens to the very real modern world around you.
Well, I mean, it's a massive challenge to issue, but it's totally necessary because we aren't just dealing with like a dry historical recounting of dates and treaties here.
No, not at all.
This is a fundamental reorientation of how we perceive the structural reality of the global economy. I mean, the concepts laid out in this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, demand that we look at global disparity differently.
How so?
Well, it argues that we can't look at poverty as just an accident of geography or, as a result of some populations just working harder than others.
Right.
Instead, the book asks us to view global inequality as the result of a deliberate, highly engineered, and deeply intertwined historical relationship.
Which is a heavy concept.
Yeah.
But before we even touch the economic theory, I feel like we have to establish the stakes.
Oh, absolutely. The context of his life is crucial.
Because the stakes here were quite literally life and death. Walter Rodney didn't just write history from the safety of like a dusty university library.
No, he lived the brutal consequences of his analysis.
He really did. And I want to set the scene based on the introduction of the book. I want you, the listener, to really picture this.
It's a chilling scene.
It is. So it's Friday evening, June 13th, 1980. We are in Georgetown, Guyana.
Right.
Walter Rodney is only 38 years old. He's a brilliant scholar. He has a wife and 3 children.
So young.
Yeah. And he is sitting in his brother Donald's car. They had stopped outside a house belonging to a man who, well, he had secretly infiltrated their political organization.
Working People's Alliance.
Exactly. So Donald goes up to the house to pick up what he was explicitly told was a walkie-talkie. They're told to test it.
Right, just a standard communication device.
That's what they thought. So they are sitting in the car waiting for a test signal. And when that signal finally comes, the device detonates.
Is a bomb.
That explosion tore through the car and ended Walter Rodney's life.
I mean, it is just a staggering, chilling reality, and it has to frame every single thing we discuss in this episode today.
It changes how you read the whole book.
Totally. When you read the introduction, which was written by Vincent Harding, Robert Hill, and William Strickland, it becomes undeniably clear.
Clear that it wasn't an accident.
Exactly. It wasn't a random act of violence. The book outlines how this assassination was the calculated culmination of a systematic campaign.
By the government.
Yes, a campaign of state-sponsored repression by the governing authorities of Guyana, specifically under the regime of President Forbes Burnham.
Wow.
Because Rodney was a massive political threat. Through his historical research and his activism, he had determined a very specific path to liberation.
Which was what?
That the only actual path for the working people was through the radical transformation of their own lives, and that meant directly challenging the neo-colonialist government that dominated their society.
And kept them impoverished.
Exactly.
It's wild because his entire life leading up to that bomb was just a whirlwind. Angela Y. Davis writes this incredible foreword to the book, and she refers to him as a scholar activist.
That's the perfect term for him.
It really is. I mean, in 1968, he was actually banned from returning to his university teaching post in Jamaica.
Wait, really? Just banned?
Yeah. Because he was doing what they called grounding with the common people. He was leaving the safe college campus to literally sit with the people of the streets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Rastafarians, the workers in the gullies. He was helping them articulate the economic unrest that eventually sparked the Black Power movement there.
It is so powerful.
And later, he taught in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, influencing a whole generation of scholars before returning to his native Guyana to organize the Working People's Alliance.
You know, Davis makes a really vital point about that term, scholar activist.
Right.
With Rodney, It reaches its absolute maximum potential.
He didn't just stay in the classroom.
No, he didn't view history as a passive hobby. He linked his meticulous historical investigations directly to a fierce determination to rid the planet of colonialism.
Right.
For Rodney, the text shows that the ultimate significance of knowledge is its capacity to transform our social worlds. History was literally an active tool for social change.
And this brings up a massive question I have for you. I want to push back on the very premise here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's be honest, most history books are treated like, I don't know, dusty museum exhibits. You look at them behind glass, you read a placard, you say, oh, how interesting, and you move on to the gift shop.
Yeah, they're generally considered pretty safe.
Exactly, they are safe. But this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Walter Rodney, it was treated by a national state apparatus like a loaded weapon.
It really was.
So why? Why was a historical analysis of the 15th to the 19th centuries considered so incredibly dangerous in 1980 that a government felt they had to blow the author up in a car?
Well, it's because if you understand the past with the clarity that Rodney provides in the book, you suddenly possess the absolute prerequisite for dismantling the present.
Oh, I see.
As the introduction highlights, Rodney envisioned that the true development of dependent peoples required a radical break with the international capitalist system.
So he was directly challenging the Cold War era world order.
Precisely. His historical analysis, according to the book, proved that the global economic system wasn't broken. It wasn't just failing developing nations by accident.
Right. It was functioning exactly as designed.
Flawlessly.
Yeah.
By violently extracting wealth from the global periphery to enrich the global center.
Wow. So he basically wrote the manual on how the system works.
He wrote a meticulously documented, undeniable blueprint showing exactly how this house of exploitation was built, brick by brick.
And if you show people how it was built,
You are giving the oppressed the structural blueprint for how to tear that house down. You are showing them exactly where the load-bearing walls are.
that makes total sense. That is why he was an existential threat to those in power.
Exactly.
So if Rodney is going to hand people that blueprint, he first has to completely demolish the prevailing excuses for why Africa is impoverished today. Oh, he absolutely tears those down.
Which takes us right into the first chapter, and it's honestly a masterclass in semantics and economics. He redefines the very word underdevelopment.
Yeah, that distinction is crucial.
Because in our modern lexicon, if I say a country is underdeveloped, we just assume it's a noun, a static state.
Like it's just a phase they're going through.
Exactly. Like a teenager who just hasn't grown up into an adult yet. They just need a little more time, maybe a little more help. But Rodney argues underdevelopment is a verb.
Yes, an action done to someone.
Right. It's an active process.
And he absolutely eviscerates the standard narratives around this. We constantly hear underdevelopment described by modern economists as a natural propensity to stagnation.
Or they say it's just a simple lack of skilled personnel.
Right, or bad infrastructure. But the text argues those are merely the lingering symptoms, not the root causes at all.
So what is the root cause? Well, A.M. Babu, in his powerful postscript to the book, talks about how developing nations in the mid-20th century were repeatedly told they were poor because of the vicious circle of poverty.
The vicious circle, what does that even mean?
It's just a fancy academic way of saying you are poor because you are poor and therefore you cannot save money and therefore you remain poor.
That's a circular non-explanation. That doesn't explain anything.
Exactly. Rodney points out the absolute absurdity of these explanations used by bourgeois economists to justify a deeply unequal world. We're just reporting what he argues here, but he makes a very strong case.
And the audacity of some of these justifications is just staggering. At one point, the book highlights an economist who literally used a biblical explanation to justify global inequality.
Oh, I remember that part.
Yeah, quoting the Gospel of St. Matthew, saying, "For unto everyone that hath shall be given, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath."
And the book dryly comments, "Amen," right after that quote.
It's perfectly sarcastic.
It captures the arrogance of the oppressor perfectly. The text also takes aim at the deeply ingrained racist explanations that are out there.
The ones implying African people are innately backward.
Right. The ones subtly or overtly implying they are culturally incapable of technological advancement. Rodney states that this racist trend in European scholarship creates a profound psychological crisis.
Because it makes people doubt themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's designed to make the colonized doubt their own human capacity to transform their environment. So to counter all of this circular logic and racist pseudoscience, he defines the core mechanism of the book.
The dialectical relationship.
Yes, the dialectic.
Okay, you have to explain that mechanism to me because, we hear the word dialectic thrown around in philosophy seminars, but how does it work here on the ground with actual money and resources?
Okay, so the book explains that you cannot understand the economic development of Europe without simultaneously understanding the economic underdevelopment of Africa.
They aren't separate.
Right? They are not two separate parallel tracks racing toward the future at different speeds. They are the exact same track.
Interesting.
They interacted constantly, and that specific interaction produced the current reality for both. Western Europe and Africa engaged in a relationship that structurally ensured the continuous transfer of wealth.
From the African continent to the European continent?
Exactly. First, the trade relationship itself was one of wildly unequal exchange. But even more insidious than mere trade is the actual legal ownership of the means of production.
Wait, I need to stop you right there and push back with the modern mainstream narrative on this.
Okay, go for it.
Because if you turn on any financial news network right now, foreign investment is championed as the ultimate, unquestionable solution to poverty in the global south.
But constantly. It's the standard talking point.
The argument is simple, right? If a Western corporation sends money, builds a factory, or opens a mine in an impoverished nation, they are creating jobs and developing that nation.
That is the narrative, yes.
But this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Walter Rodney, makes the case that foreign investment is actually the root cause of the poverty. Walk me through how investment becomes extraction.
Let's trace a single dollar of profit to see how the mechanism functions, according to Rodney's analysis.
Okay, let's trace it.
Imagine a diamond mine or copper mine in an African nation. The physical resources are in African soil.
Right.
And the grueling physical labor to extract those resources is performed by African workers. But who holds the legal deed to the mine?
A European or North American corporation.
Exactly. Who finances the operation? A foreign-owned bank. Who insures the equipment? A foreign-owned insurance company.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So when the copper is sold on the global market and generates a massive profit, where does that capital go?
It doesn't stay local.
No, it does not go to building local African hospitals or funding local universities. The vast majority of that wealth is electronically transferred out of the continent.
Straight into the accounts of foreign shareholders.
Yes, in London, Paris, or New York. The capital is then used to fund the development of European and American infrastructure.
So the African worker is essentially financing the modernization of the West.
Precisely. The book argues that even after the colonial armies march away and the foreign flags are lowered, the economic extraction pipeline remains fully intact.
Wow.
The text explicitly states that development during the colonial period was nothing more than a cynical shorthand expression for the intensification of colonial exploitation.
So the wealth was systematically grabbed by Europe.
Yes, and massive, deliberate restrictions were placed on the African capacity to use its own economic potential.
So in this structural framework, foreign investment isn't charity at all.
Not at all. The author argues it is the very engine of wealth extraction.
Okay, so if Rodney is going to argue that Africa was actively robbed of its trajectory and forced into this extraction pipeline, he first has to prove there was a trajectory to begin with.
Right, you can't claim someone derailed a train if the train was never moving.
Exactly. So what did the economic and social infrastructure of Africa look like before the massive influx of European extraction in the 15th century?
Well, he provides a sweeping, incredibly detailed overview of development across the continent up to the 15th century.
Does he romanticize it?
No, he doesn't paint a utopian picture at all. He looks at the complex reality of evolving statehood.
Okay.
He examines societies in Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, and Zimbabwe. The text shows complex agricultural systems, trans-Saharan trade networks, and metalworking.
All developing independently.
Yes. But a particularly striking example he dives into is the Amazulu society up to the 19th century, specifically focusing on the figure of Shaka Zulu.
Oh, Shaka Zulu. That's interesting because he is usually portrayed in Western media purely as a fearsome warrior, almost like a mythological figure of violence.
Exactly. But how does Rodney analyze him?
Yeah, what does the book say?
Rodney completely strips away the colonial myth-making. He looks at Shaka as a supreme political architect and a state builder.
Oh, wow.
He points out that Shaka is frequently compared favorably by both African and European commentators to the great men of European history, like Napoleon.
That makes sense.
But Rodney uses Shaka to examine how leadership functioned in relation to the development of the society as a whole.
So he wasn't just conquering for the sake of it.
No, Shaka fundamentally reorganized the social and military structures. He integrated disparate clans into a unified national identity.
He innovated.
Yes. The book explains how he revolutionized military tactics, replacing long-throwing spears with the short-stabbing assegai.
Which changed how they fought.
Completely. It required close-quarters combat and totally changed the psychological discipline of the army. He also created an age-grade system that served as a mechanism for social cohesion and civic duty.
So this was a complex, sophisticated political organization?
Yes, evolving entirely independently, innovating its own solutions to local challenges.
But then comes the catastrophic mechanism that violently halts that internal evolution across the continent.
The transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah. The book uses a devastating quote from the Republic of Guinea's Ahmed Sékou Touré from 1962.
What did he say?
He said, "Africa remains marked by the crimes of the slave traders. Up to now, her potentialities are restricted by underpopulation."
That's a powerful way to frame it.
Right. We often think of the slave trade purely in terms of the horrific human suffering, which is, of course, paramount. But Rodney forces us to look at the sheer demographic and economic math.
The demographic drain is the foundational violence of underdevelopment, according to the text.
Because you are forcibly removing tens of millions of people.
The most able-bodied, productive, and innovative people from an entire continent. You aren't just taking individuals.
You're taking the farmers, the blacksmiths.
The young leaders, the future inventors. The book argues that you are completely destroying the capacity for societal and technological development.
Because the sheer human capital required to innovate and build surplus wealth has been stolen.
It's exactly. And while Africa is losing its demographic future, Europe is using that stolen labor as the absolute bedrock of its industrial revolution.
The text highlights quotes that prove Europeans knew exactly what they were doing, too.
Oh, they definitely knew.
Like Malachy Postlethwaite, an English economic writer in 1745. He called British trade a magnificent superstructure of American commerce and naval power on an African foundation.
He openly admitted it.
Openly. He admitted the empire was built on enslaved African labor. And then there's the French Bishop Maury, who argued in 1791 against ending the slave trade.
Because of the economic impact.
Yeah, he told the French National Assembly that if France lost the exclusive trade to feed its manufacturers, maintain its navy, and balance its trade, the kingdom would be irretrievably lost.
Wow.
Europe's entire economic superpower status was consciously, deliberately built on the enslavement and underdevelopment of Africa.
The text makes it clear that the wealth generated by enslaved labor in the Americas flowed back to Europe. It
Right.
funded the banking systems, the insurance companies.
Like Barclays and Lloyd's of London.
Exactly. And it funded the technological innovations of the Industrial Revolution. Even James Watt's steam engine was funded by wealth derived from the West Indian slave trade.
That is a direct, undeniable transfer of momentum.
One society is violently paused, while the other is violently accelerated.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable question. And it's a very common counter-argument you hear when discussing this specific history.
I think I know which one you mean.
The argument usually goes something like, well, didn't some African leaders participate in the slave trade? Weren't there active alliances with European merchants?
Yes, that comes up a lot.
So how does Rodney handle the historical truth of African complicity or alliances with early European traders?
Well, the book handles it with incredible, clear-eyed historical nuance. He doesn't shy away from the reality of it at all.
Okay, so how does he explain it?
He places it in the correct context of global political organization at the time. He explains it through the mechanism of a classic divide-and-conquer strategy.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah. You have to remember, in the 15th and 16th centuries, Africa was not a single unified political entity.
All right.
It was a massive continent comprised of a large number of distinct socio-political groupings, kingdoms, and empires that had not arrived at a common Pan-African purpose.
I think a good analogy here might help clarify the mechanism of these early alliances.
Let's hear it.
It's like imagining two local, multi-generational family diners in a small town. They're fierce rivals. They fight over the local lunch crowd. They try to outdo each other's menus. They're completely focused on beating the guy across the street.
Okay, I follow.
Suddenly, representatives from a massive global fast food conglomerate come to town. The conglomerate goes to Diner A and says, "We will give you state-of-the-art kitchen equipment and massive marketing funds, but only if you help us bankrupt Diner B."
Oh, I see.
So Diner A takes the deal, thinking they're just winning their local historical rivalry. They have absolutely no idea that the global conglomerate is quietly buying up the town's water supply, the local farms, and the shipping routes.
With the ultimate goal of bulldozing both diners to build a mega franchise.
Exactly.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the asymmetry of information and intent that the book discusses. African rulers had a partial, localized view of the global situation.
They were focused on their immediate neighbors.
Yes, they sought alliances with the newly arrived Europeans to secure firearms and manufactured goods to defeat local rivals.
They had no idea what the long game was.
Absolutely none. The text argues they could not possibly know that the Europeans were systematically laying the groundwork to conquer all Africans.
Wow.
This partial view, the book argues, was itself a testimony of African political fragmentation relative to Europe, which was already operating on a model of global dominion.
So by the time they realized the threat,
It was too late. By the time African leaders realized the true existential threat of European encroachment, the demographic and economic damage of the slave trade had already fatally weakened their societies.
so they were fighting local skirmishes while the Europeans were playing a global game of resource domination.
Fundamentally rewriting the rules of the board.
And once the transatlantic slave trade formally ended, the extraction didn't stop. It just evolved.
It morphed into direct territorial colonialism.
Right. In the late 19th century, culminating in the scramble for Africa in 1885, this resulted in the absolute restructuring of African society.
And this transition into the colonial era brought new, profound, and deeply cynical contradictions.
Like what?
Well, the colonialist had to figure out how to physically conquer a massive continent relatively cheaply.
So what did they do?
The book details the tragic, calculated irony of Europeans weaponizing Africans to conquer other Africans.
Oh, that's incredibly dark.
For instance, African residents of the long-established French coastal ports in Senegal were put into French army uniforms to march inland and conquer the interior populations.
Wait, really?
Yes. And when the British defeated the powerful Asante Empire in 1874, they heavily utilized African troops recruited from the coastal towns.
Because the coastal towns were already dependent on trade.
Exactly. Because they had been interacting with European traders for centuries, their local economies were entirely dependent on the European presence. Some even identified themselves as Dutch, Danish, or English subjects.
Wow, so the colonialists expertly manipulated these manufactured dependencies.
Yes, to facilitate the military conquest of the entire continent.
Which brings us to the supposed benefits of colonialism.
Ah, yes, the benefits argument.
This is a narrative you still hear defended today. Politicians and certain historians will argue, sure, the violence of colonialism was bad, but look at the modernization.
Look at the railroads. Look at the hospitals.
Exactly. Look at the introduction of modern medicine and scientific farming. But Rodney aggressively tears this argument apart by examining the actual mechanisms of these benefits.
He weighs those supposed benefits against the cold reality of who they were actually built for and who they served.
Right, who actually got to use them.
The text points out that yes, modern medicine and clinical surgery were introduced, but these resources were strictly clustered in areas with high European populations.
Or where healthy African labor was desperately needed for extraction.
Exactly. The book argues it was to serve the European bourgeoisie, not to relieve general African suffering. Bourgeois science met the needs of its own society.
The infrastructure argument is perhaps the most glaring one. If you look at a map of colonial railways in Africa, it is incredibly revealing.
Oh, it reveals everything.
The railways and roads were not built to connect African communities to one another.
No, they did not connect a farming region to a local manufacturing hub to stimulate internal trade.
So where did they go?
Instead, they were built in straight lines connecting inland copper mines, gold mines, and cash crop plantations directly to the coastal ports.
Literally extraction pipelines.
Designed solely to move raw materials out of Africa and onto ships bound for Europe as quickly and cheaply as possible. They were not arteries of local development.
They were the veins through which the wealth of the continent was bled dry. Let's use an analogy for this infrastructure benefit argument.
I love your analogies. Let's hear it.
It's like a burglar breaks into your house. He steals your life savings, he takes all your jewelry, he empties your refrigerator, and he forces you to carry his bags to his getaway car.
Okay.
But on his way out, he installs a slightly sturdier lock on your front door. A lock, by the way, that only he has the key to.
Right.
You wouldn't look at your empty house, your stolen future, and say, well, at least I got a modernized lock out of the deal. I guess it was a net positive.
Definitely not.
So I ask you, based on the text, did colonialism bring any genuine foundational modernization to the African people?
The book's answer is a resounding, unequivocal no. Because colonialism was, at its very core, a complete negation of human freedom.
But what about the argument that Africans showed initiative?
There is a sympathetic school of historians who try to argue that. They say Africans showed great initiative by actively moving into cash crop farming or engaging in colonial commerce.
And Rodney dismantles that.
Systematically. He argues those actions were merely desperate responses to the extremely narrow, suffocating options dictated by the colonialists.
So they didn't have a real choice.
Right. He states a profound truth in the book. True historical initiative, by a whole people or by individuals, requires that they have the power to decide on the direction in which they want to move.
And under colonialism, the power to decide the direction of the economy, the culture, and the future lay entirely in the hands of the foreign administrators.
Exactly.
We also absolutely must look at the devastating social impact, particularly the impact on gender dynamics.
Yes, Angela Davis highlights this brilliantly in her foreword to this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by Walter Rodney.
She points out that because Rodney was such a rigorous, methodical scholar, he didn't ignore the gendered realities of exploitation.
He explicitly details how, under colonialism, African women's historic social, religious, and political privileges disappeared.
This is a crucial mechanism of societal destruction, because before colonialism in many African societies, women's agricultural work and trade held immense political and social power.
Right. They had economic sovereignty within their communities. But the colonial system arrived with rigid, patriarchal Victorian values.
So they changed the rules.
They redefined what valuable work meant. Only the cultivation of export cash crops like peanuts, cotton, or cocoa, which the colonialists demanded and primarily forced men to farm, was deemed modern and integrated into the cash economy.
And the women's work.
Simultaneously, the essential agricultural work women did to actually feed the community was downgraded.
Dismissed as traditional or backward.
Yes, or practically invisible to the colonial state.
Yeah.
Colonialism didn't just steal the crops. It fundamentally redefined the value of labor, completely stripping women of their historical authority.
Plunging them into new depths of economic subjugation.
Exactly.
And parallel to this economic subjugation is the psychological warfare of colonial education.
With the education system.
The book bluntly states that the colonial school system was an education for underdevelopment. It wasn't designed to uplift. It was a primary tool of control.
The formal school system and the informal value system of colonialism actively destroyed traditional social solidarity.
It promoted what Rodney calls the worst form of alienated individualism without social responsibility.
The text explains that the colonial education system was designed to train a very small, select group of Africans to serve as low-level clerks, administrators, and enforcers.
Essentially a comprador class.
Trained to facilitate the extraction of their own people's wealth. It taught them to revere European history and despise their own.
Which perfectly, tragically contrasts with the grand, sweeping ideals of bourgeois liberty that Europe was heavily promoting at the time.
Oh, the hypocrisy is stunning.
The book quotes Jules Ferry, a former French colonial minister, who explicitly stated the quiet part out loud.
What did he say?
He said that the French Revolution, with all its lofty talk of the rights of man, was not fought on behalf of the blacks of Africa.
Oh.
Bourgeois liberty, equality, and fraternity simply did not apply to colonial subjects. As Ferry said, Africans had to make do with bayonets, riot acts, and gunboats.
The Enlightenment ideals of human rights conveniently stopped at the shores of Europe. That quote really encapsulates the profound hypocrisy of the whole colonial project.
The civilized world was built on the systematic deployment of uncivilized violence against the global periphery.
Yes.
So we have traced this centuries-long process of extraction, wealth transfer, and societal destruction. Rodney's detailed historical analysis primarily ends in the early 1960s during the wave of African independence movements.
Right.
But the introduction and the postscript of the book make it explicitly, painfully clear that these mechanisms of extraction did not magically disappear when the new flags went up.
No, they are still fully operational today.
Exactly. So how do we take this history and use it as a tool for the present? This brings us to the practical lessons and the modern reality of neocolonialism.
This is where we turn to the incredible postscript by A.M. Babu. He wrote this looking back at the failure of the United Nations' highly publicized Second Economic Decade.
And he had a lot of critique for that, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He points out the absolute infuriating absurdity of expecting the rich industrialized countries to charitably solve the crushing poverty that they themselves historically created.
And currently continue to benefit from.
Exactly. He specifically calls out the international appeals, asking developed countries to contribute a measly 1% of their national income to help developing countries.
1%. That's nothing.
Babu argues this is not a solution, it is an insult. It is a way to condone and institutionalize global poverty so the rich nations can feel charitable while maintaining the structural dominance that guarantees their wealth.
Babu also provides a scathing, unflinching critique of modern leadership within the developing world itself, right?
He does. He notes that when political leadership loses its internal ideological direction, things fall apart.
When they stop trying to find structural solutions for the masses.
Yes. When they become obsessed with accumulating wealth for individual use, they become what he calls commandist.
Commandist, what does that mean in practice?
Well, the mechanism of that commandist shift is vital to understand. When politicians lose the support of the people because they are serving foreign capital instead of local needs, they can no longer govern by consensus.
They have to govern by issuing commands.
Right. And when politicians just issue commands without rationale or popular support, they eventually become entirely redundant to the military.
Oh, I see where this leads.
The generals look at the politicians and say, if we are just forcing the people to obey through power, why do we need you?
Wow.
This, Babu argues, explains the tragic rise of military generals taking over at African summits in the post-colonial era. The failure of the economic structure inevitably leads to the collapse of the political structure.
And this connects deeply to the work of the revolutionary psychiatrist and philosopher Frantz Fanon.
Yes, his work is cited heavily in the introduction to the book.
Fanon's masterwork, The Wretched of the Earth, is almost like a parallel text to Rodney's analysis.
It really is.
The introduction quotes Fanon's powerful, urgent call to action. He writes, "Come then, comrades. The European game has finally ended. We must find something different. We today can do everything, so long as we do not imitate Europe, so long as we are not obsessed by the desire to catch up with Europe. We must invent and we must make discoveries."
Fanon and Rodney both understood the ultimate truth of the dialectic.
Which is?
The dialectic of underdevelopment doesn't just harm the periphery. The center, Europe and North America, is also spiritually warped, deeply desensitized, and morally disintegrated by its centuries-long role as the oppressor.
So it hurts everyone, structurally.
According to the text, a society built on the continuous exploitation of others cannot be a healthy society.
Right.
True, sustainable human development, therefore, requires a fundamental, radical transformation of both the center and the periphery. You cannot just try to catch up to a system that is inherently diseased. You have to build a new system.
This is where I want to issue a direct call to active participation for you, the listener.
It's the most important part of this massive discussion we've had.
It is. We've established the mechanism. We know that underdevelopment is a verb. If foreign investment, debt traps, and unequal trade terms are the modern equivalents of colonial extraction, how should we view our world right now, today?
We have to look closely at it.
When you look at the massive, opaque, global supply chains that dictate our lives, the lithium powering the smartphone or computer you are listening to this on right now,
The cobalt and the batteries of our electric cars.
the coffee in the cup sitting on your desk, how are we, sitting in the global center, actively participating in this ongoing dialectic?
It's a tough question to face.
Are we passively accepting this deeply unequal exchange of resources and labor as just the natural order of things?
As we've seen throughout this marathon discussion today, this book challenges us to wake up and realize that the exact same game is still being played. The players are just wearing corporate suits instead of colonial military uniforms.
To synthesize this immense heavy journey we've taken through the episode today, the poverty we see in the global south is not an accident of nature.
It is not a result of bad weather or geography or a lack of innate human ingenuity.
The central, undeniable thesis of this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, is that the current economic landscape of our world is the direct result of a deliberate, centuries-long and entirely ongoing historical process of extraction and exploitation.
Europe and North America developed by actively, violently underdeveloping Africa. That is the dialectic.
And if you want to truly grasp the profound depth of that dialectic, to see the blueprints of how our world was constructed, I am explicitly asking you to purchase this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney.
It is essential reading. Do not let this podcast be the end of your engagement with these monumental ideas. Let it be the beginning.
Furthermore, I ask you to engage with the author's vital legacy and ongoing work on social media. Specifically, follow the Walter Rodney Foundation.
Their work in advancing his contributions to rigorous scholarship and active social change is absolutely essential today.
Thank you so much for giving us your time and joining us on this incredible journey of historical discovery. Please follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast so we can continue to bring these structural, world-changing texts to light.
And I will leave you with one final lingering thought to carry with you. Walter Rodney showed us that underdevelopment is an active, ongoing process, not a static state of being.
Right.
So tomorrow morning, when you look at the made-in labels on the products you buy, and when you read the mainstream news stories casually discussing foreign debt crises or international aid packages, ask yourself, what active, violent processes of underdevelopment are we blindly accepting as just the way the world works?